welcome to Holding Space with Claire Bidwell Smith and Cynthia Carter Perrilliat. My name is Derek Hosberg, and I'm the program director at Reimagine. We are a nonprofit organization that sparks community experiences, just like this one, that empower individuals, families, and communities to face the hardest parts of our existence, including serious illness and death, while celebrating life and one another. I'm going to jump in and just introduce Claire, who many of you, I'm sure, attended some of her events last year, but I'm just super excited. This is our first holding space of 2021. And just for a little background about Claire, she is a therapist specializing in grief, and the author of 3 books of nonfiction: The Rules of Inheritance, After This, When Life is Over, Where Do We Go? And Anxiety, The Missing Stage of Grief. And Claire offers numerous online programs for grief in addition to working with people on one-on-one. Led by her own experiences with grief and fueled by her work in hospice and private practice, Claire strives to provide support for all kinds of people experiencing all kinds of grief. And I'll be putting in the chat some other programs that she has that she's offering, so you can look into those as well. But with that, I'm going to pass it off to Claire.
Thank you so much, Dara. And hi, everybody. Welcome. Like Dara said, this is our first holding space of 2021, and I'm really excited to be back. I started this series, almost a year ago, a few weeks after the pandemic, which is the anniversary is today of having been declared, I think, a pandemic, 1 year. And I started this series pretty quickly after that, just as a place to offer support and conversation for people who were suddenly really thinking about grief and loss and end of life in a new, unexpected way, like we all were. So it's been an amazing partnership with Reimagine, so many amazing guests we've had here, and the audience participation has been just incredible. We've had so many great conversations with all of you, and I always appreciate your questions and insights as we go along. So I'm really excited today to have Cynthia Carter. I was like gonna get it perfectly, and then I already messed it up. Tell me again.
Carter Perrilliat.
Carter Perrilliat. Thank you, Cynthia. I am really excited to have Cynthia today as our first guest back in 2021. Reverend Cynthia Carter Perrilliat, MPA, is co-founder and executive director of the Alameda County Care Alliance Collaborative, a faith-based community program in partnership with local, clinical, academic, and community organizations, engaging 25 faith-based organizations and their pastors in Alameda and Contra Costa counties of Northern California. The ACCA Advanced Illness Care Program assists persons needing advanced illness care and their families. I have a cat that's excited to be here with us, and their families manage physical, emotional, spiritual, social, and advanced care planning needs. Cynthia is the creator of I Choose to Prepare, a dramatic and creative approach to advanced care planning, soliciting youth involvement through spoken word, dance, and the visual arts. She's co-principal investigator of the Refining Advanced Care Planning, Training, and Toolkit for the faith-based African American community. Reverend Cynthia has over 25 years experience as a hospice and palliative care educator, trainer, and marketing professional. She's a much sought after motivational speaker and advocate for health equity and inclusion for communities of color, an ordained minister serving at the historic Allen Temple Baptist Church in Oakland, California, as well as a gospel recording artist under her Splendor record label. Cynthia, what a bio. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Claire. It's great to be here. Thank you, Reimagine, also.
So, these conversations I have, I don't prepare a lot of questions because I love for it to just kind of be really two people talking to each other in a very real way. And on that, I would love to start by just kind of, every person I've met who works in this field of end of life space came to it from an interesting place. So I would love to just start by asking you, how did you get into this space? What was it that brought you or drew you to it?
Thank you, Claire. I think that's such an important question, and it's one that I ask others, frankly, that find themselves in this space as well. And so for me, like many others, it is and has been a very personal experience. My dear father, husband, father of 5, uncle, friend, community faith leader, was diagnosed with end-stage prostate cancer at his first visit. Actually, it was simply just to check out some symptoms that he was a little concerned about. And his cancer had already metastasized. And so he was given 8 months to live. That very first visit, it was traumatizing for us as a family, a very close family. I'm from Ohio originally, if I have any Ohioans or Midwesterners on the line. But it was such a traumatic experience. But we really had to draw near. And what I mean by that is really center ourselves to what really brings meaning and what's important to us as individuals and as a family. And so it was our holistic approach, mind, body, and spirit, which really carried us through that process. And so my story is unique in that my dad outlived that 8 months prognosis to 8 years.
Wow.
And so I'm a true believer in hope and holding on to hope, even in grief, even in tragedy. I'm a firm believer that there's a rainbow somewhere in the process, and even what appears to be the end.
I agree. That's an amazing story. I think that a lot of people are familiar with being with loved ones who are near end of life, especially in this last year. What do you think? How do people find hope and faith, especially in the era of COVID, when they're grieving and when they're going through a caregiving experience with a loved one who is approaching end of life?
I think we'd all agree that's a huge challenge. It's a huge challenge for us as human beings that are meant to be sensitive and caring and connected. I really believe in just the importance of connectedness, of not only us with our friends and families, but communities and as people. I really am a firm believer of the humanity of life and this, and just this sheer kind of intricate way that we're all connected. And so I think what all that speaks to from my perspective is that even in grief, and I think sometimes you can be challenged by the statement I'm about to make, but even in grief, there is some good to be found. And I think that good speaks to that need for connectedness and the need for extended humanity. I saw in the chat an individual that spoke about the loss of her beloved pet and understanding how important pets are to us and the warmth and the love and just the unconditional love that comes from a pet. It certainly, I think, in many ways personifies the fact that there is the need for connectedness. And so the good side of grief says there is someone or some being or some pet that we can connect with to help bridge that chasm. And it is a chasm. And it's a painful process, but the good is that there is a person or being that is designed to connect with you in that hallowed space. And
I couldn't agree more.
Hallowed space. It's a very important space to really find ways to live in and process through.
I agree. I think there can be so much good in grief. There is so much good in grief. I think it can be really transformative. I think it asks us what's meaningful to us. I think it can bring people together, can make us appreciate either the relationship that is transitioning or just the other relationships around us. Because you're right, it's about love and it's about relationships and it's about those that we're connected to.
Could I just add something to that, Claire? I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I like just how a statement that you made triggered something internal to me. My background is not only from a spiritual place, but a place that I had a lot of activity engaging in palliative care and hospice care as a trainer and educator, and even as a marketing person. And in that space, one of the things that was made very clear to me having been connected to all different ethnic groups and genders and individuals from various backgrounds, is just how important that this space of grief can be in terms of a learning opportunity. And to really recognize that we can connect with people across ethnic groups and backgrounds, and whatever our quote unquote so-called differences may be, this sheer sense of the commonality of our humanity. It's such a time to connect to that humanity of every human being. We all have that in common because we're all going to go through that journey. So I just wanted to highlight that because I think you'll be surprised. As a matter of fact, I think grief has surprises for us. If we look for them, there are surprises in grief of individuals that you may not even imagine. It could be the person that's helping to the electrician or the plumber that may come through, or someone you may meet in a support group. But the reality is there are people that are designed for each of us to help us navigate that space and connect us to a much deeper humanity.
I think that's beautiful. I think that grief is something we have to open ourselves up to. I think a lot of us try to run from it or try to avoid it, partly because our culture doesn't support it enough, partly because it's hard, it's scary, it's painful. We may not always have as much support around us. But I do find when people can lean into their grief, that's when they can kind of actually move through it in a beautiful way and kind of find all of the surprises that grief has to offer, you know?
Yeah, Claire, would you say that it opens us up to the potentiality of being more open to the moment? It's so easy to shrink and to become smaller and to be stuck within ourselves. But I see grief calling us to open our minds and our hearts and believe that there is more.
Yeah, I definitely think so.
More for us to learn.
Both of my parents died when I was young. I was 18 when my mom died and 25 when my dad died. And they were incredibly painful, shattering experiences. But there was also this strange liberation that came with them of just seeing the world in a way that I had never seen it before, and seeing so much beauty, seeing so much freedom that I hadn't seen before. You know, I'd felt very constrained by my little life that I lived, and suddenly anything seemed possible and everything seemed possible. With that came some anxiety, but also this kind of profound freedom and liberation, which I thought was really incredible. And it's informed my life all this time. You know, I think I've made a lot of bold choices and kind of embraced life in big ways as a result of that.
Yes. I was thinking about an individual that has been a person that has an advanced illness in the organization that I have the just blessed privilege to participate in. And this woman has advanced cancer. She has a lot of other health challenges. But one of the things that she's taught me in her process is that if she extends outside of herself, so she likes to send greeting cards and make phone calls to people that she knows that are also in that challenged, anticipatory, grieving space, to reach out to them. So I just think for all those that are listening and watching, just the importance of, if you could just for a moment step outside of yourself and think of another individual that you know is also grieving, or you've connected with that's also in that challenge space, you might be really surprised how that opens you up. And because you're reaching out and helping another, it's just something so almost magical about stepping outside of our own pain and reaching to touch another in that space.
I agree. I think this last year, there's been some positives that have happened during the pandemic. I think grief has been a really interesting thing that's happened in that we've all lost something in the last year, you know, multiple things for many of us. But I don't think there's anyone that hasn't been touched by some form of loss in the last year. And this is worldwide, which is kind of phenomenal in that connectedness, right? Grief can often be very lonely, I think, and very isolating. When you're going through a loss like your father, sometimes it can feel like the rest of the world is going on like normal and you're the only one who is grieving or who's going through this experience. But in this last year, we've all been in this together, which I think is really quite profound and beautiful.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I want to ask you about caregiving. When my mother died before my dad, and I'm an only child. So when he had prostate cancer as well, and his kind of came back after several years, maybe 8, 9 years, just like your dad. And I was his sole caregiver with hospice at home and was there with him while he died. And it was one of the hardest jobs I've ever done, being a caregiver. And I wanted to kind of just talk about that and open it up, because I think it is something that's definitely getting more conversation these days, but still not enough. It is a very important topic to kind of support and talk about. Tell me about your side of caregiving.
Yeah, I too was a caregiver for my dad, and even more recently for my elder brother, who I think, both my brother and father were only in their 60s when they passed away. So I consider that to be very young. But caregiving is such, if we're honest, a tremendously challenging role. It really is. And caregivers, I think, don't get the kind of attention and, frankly, the kind of love that they need, the simple acknowledgement of the role that they play, the important role that they play. Don't get me on the subject of policy changes and needs around this space, because people are losing their jobs that are caregivers. They're losing, I have to be honest and say, we're seeing a lot of caregivers lose their lives because they are pouring so much of themselves into this person they're caring for, their loved one, their friend, their companion, that they forget to really take care of themselves. So self-care is really huge in the caregiver space. I can't say enough about they're the unsung heroes. I mean, the data shows that we're talking about 22 million people growing daily that are caregivers across this country that really don't have the kind of support and the kind of training that they need to manage that really tremendous job that they're managing. Not only caring for the person that they are caring for, but also taking care of themselves in the midst of it all. So the health systems and all that speaks to, again, the legislation and the policy changes that need to happen in this space. We need to have a national conversation, and I'm hoping this administration can advance this cause. I'm hearing some really positive things about this administration's passion and compassion in this space. And I'm just hoping that we can really address this. It's across party lines, and again, face and deal with the humanity of the subject. So it's a big one. It's a huge, important subject.
I agree about this administration. I have a lot of hope that we will get to address some of these things. I think we have a very empathic president who's been through his own personal experiences in these realms. And for the nation going through this much grief and death and illness right now, I think it's hopeful to have him there.
Yes.
One of the things I felt like when I was a caregiver is that I didn't have any guidance on how to be a caregiver, how to take care of myself as a caregiver.
Yes.
But this was 20 years ago. Has that changed?
Has it changed? There's so much work that still needs to be done. One of the things that the Alameda County Care Alliance is doing is we are first and foremost looking at opportunities for expansion of this work, because what we're hearing across the country is we need more hands on deck. We need more people that are caring, compassionate, many that have been caregivers that are going through their own healing process, but are now ready to extend themselves to help others in this space. That was certainly my story. I wanted to give back as a result of the support that my mom as primary caregiver, myself and siblings received when my dad and brother were dealing with their advanced illnesses. And so I think that, again, one of the things that our organization is doing is we've developed a workbook for caregivers, and it's broken down in about 4 parts. And one of the parts, as I called out earlier, is self-care, identifying your own needs. And so our care navigators help people by calling out through a needs assessment, emotionally, where are you? Spiritually, where are you? Physically, what's happening with you as a person, and then zeroing in and trying to help them get connected to resources and empowering them so that they can take better care of themselves. And that's just one important section of the workbook. One of the other pieces of that is very simply what we call this caregiver fellowship group. Who are the people that are part of your support team? You cannot do this alone. And many times people feel that, oh gosh, they don't want to bother their other family members or friends. But you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't reach out and connect with other people within your family context, friendship, your faith-based community, whatever represents community for you. It's so important to identify who those potential players are, and then identifying what do you need them to do? How can they support you as a primary caregiver or a secondary caregiver? So I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, but I'm proud to say that our organization is zeroing in on how we can best support caregivers in that all important space.
I am so grateful that you're doing this work. That's amazing. I'd like to talk about end of life and healthcare in communities of color. Can you talk about what needs to change? I mean, so much, but like, what are the big pieces that right now are in focus?
Yeah, that's a big question. It's another big one because many of us either know or are learning about the systemic racism that exists in the country. The healthcare system certainly is high on the totem pole in participating in that issue around systemic racism. It is so deeply ingrained, and a lot of it, very simply put, is just the lack of, how shall we say, the lack of compassion as it relates to just dealing with people that look different than you. And so that speaks to the need for more healthcare professionals that are people of color. It's not that we don't have African-American, Latinx, Asian physicians and people that are desiring to be trained in this space, but it's also an issue of getting the opportunities to really be more deeply engaged in leadership in these organizations. Same issue as it relates to gender. Women have more challenges. So people that are both female and people of color, now you've got a multiplied effect that causes barriers and challenges in terms of being in positions of authority. There's so much need as we think about the access to care, access to quality care, access to the funding that's important for people to get the best quality and equitable care that they can receive. These are all huge barriers and inequities that exist presently. So the need is huge. One of the things that we're doing in our work is simply to train people that look like the community, that can speak the language of the community, and have the trust. So this issue, again, is very centrally focused around medical mistrust. How do we change that? One of the other things we're doing are partnering. So we have faith leaders and physician leaders partnering through. Pre-COVID, we were having pastor, clinician, and physician dinners where we have these informal opportunities so that people can get to know one another on a more personal basis and see if they have more in common than they have uncommon. So those are just some of the ways that we're going about trying to help these leaders to know that all of community needs them to be on the same page so that they can get the best care they can possibly receive. So those are some of our strategies.
I think it was Pastor Corey Kennard who was a guest here last year, and we were talking about the changes that need to happen in just the education and training as well, because it goes, so far down, so many different places. Are you seeing that? Any changes happening there or talk around that?
Well, specifically in this environment as a result of the George Floyd event that we all saw with our own eyes nationally. And of course, I think it's opening a lot of eyes and ears to simply what happens on a day-to-day basis in communities of color, particularly African American and Latinx communities. And so I think people are asking more of the right questions. How can I be better informed? And how can I participate with people that I meet that are of a different race or that are Blacks and Browns, just to connect with them on a level that says, I'm listening and I want to hear what you have to say. I want to hear and learn more about your experience. And I think just education on a very, how shall I say, basic level. When you have opportunity to connect with people of color and learn more about their experiences, that's important to do. And I think it helps Caucasian individuals and others to be more informed so that they can see the humanity or the lack of humanity that's happening around us every single day. So can't say enough about education, the opportunity that we all can have day to day to connect with people on a very human level and become better listeners, and then have that compassion and that connectedness that we spoke about earlier.
Absolutely. I think, like the experience of grief, the pandemic has so many positives that have come. They're painful ones, painful lessons that we've had to learn, or painful moments we've had to go through. And I think so much was illuminated in this last year, so much that was already there and to be seen, but was really illuminated in important ways in this last year. And so I think as we come out of the pandemic, we're coming into this new space, right? Like this new space where I'm really hopeful we can start to make changes in so many different places.
Yes.
We're going to open it up to questions soon. So if you guys want to start putting anything in the chat or raise your hand with the little raise your hand button, we're going to get to those shortly. But I wanted to ask you, Cynthia, how do we go back to, we're not going back to normal life, and we're going into a new normal, right? We're not going back to what we were, what we had. I don't think that's possible. But how do you see kind of re-entry, as it seems like we're finally starting to head that way with all the vaccinations happening?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm personally thrilled to see that the vaccinations are being spread in not only the urban areas, but also the rural areas of our communities. I was watching a PBS story just yesterday about how in these rural communities, people have to drive 100 miles, 200 miles to simply get to a site where they can receive the vaccinations. And so I just think it's imperative for us to, those of us that are people of color, to help our sisters and brothers and friends and colleagues to really I'm having a tongue twister here, the due diligence to really explore their own research so that they have a comfort level about these vaccinations. We know that there's a lot of history in Black and Brown communities, particularly the Black communities, as it relates to experimentation. And we've heard, some of us have even some direct connections through what happened through the Tuskegee experiment, where the federal government was involved in and could have made a tremendous impact in saving the lives of African American men, but they did nothing. Henrietta Lacks. I run into people regularly in the work that I do in the clinician community that don't know that HeLa cells represents a woman's name, Henrietta Lacks, who literally had her cells stolen from her. Her family still isn't receiving the compensation that they deserve. And every single one of us on this call and that aren't on this call have benefited from this African-American woman's cells that miraculously continued to replicate themselves and have helped so tremendously with research in the healthcare space. So what needs to happen? I think we need to continue to hear what people are saying in terms of their fears and their concerns, and that are justified, but also those of us that have had the vaccinations to share what our experience has been like and give people the opportunity to make their own decisions. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Again, I think it speaks to that connectedness we talked about earlier. In this space, we're all connected. If COVID hadn't done anything else, it's taught us we are all connected, be it in this country, be it across the world, we're all connected. So we all have a part to play, and certainly we all must continue to wear our mask and maintain the guidelines that we've been directed to do.
Absolutely. Have you been vaccinated?
I have.
And how was it?
One of those fortunate ones that, other than soreness in the site where the vaccination took place, and I think with the first vaccination, I experienced slight headaches, but the second vaccination, I had no problem at all, again, other than soreness in my arm. So it was a
great. That sounds
positive experience, and I feel so relieved.
Yeah, I bet.
How relieved.
You feel more relieved than you expected to? Like, does it?
No. I just felt very strongly from the beginning that getting that vaccination was going to be helpful for me and my family and everybody that I'm exposed to and is exposed to me as well.
Absolutely. I had COVID at the end of January. So that was its own experience that I'm grateful to be on the other side of. I want to address some things in the chat. Someone is looking for the workbook on your website, the caregiver workbook.
Yes.
Do you know where that is?
I'm sorry, I wasn't clear of the question. You're asking how they can access the workbook?
Yes.
Yeah, so it would be helpful if yourself or Dara could get us email addresses. We have actually a caregiver workbook and a care planning workbook to help with advanced care planning. And we're happy to share those. However, we would really need to be connected with the individual because we want to also make sure that they can have someone to walk through that process with them as well, if that's important to them. So receiving email addresses, that would be tremendously helpful.
If people want to privately message me in the chat with their email addresses, I'll make sure they get to Cynthia.
Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Let's see. Judy wants to ask us to please address the process of re-entry into our new world for the elderly. What do you think about how the elderly are going to re-enter?
So one of the things that I'm really pleased about that's happening here in Northern California and Alameda County in particular, where I live, is that the county officials are seeing the need to bring the vaccinations to the community where individuals live. Our elderly cannot always get to their doctor's office or get to a health system. So I'm happy to see that they're bringing vaccinations. For example, some of our Alameda County collaborative church partners are hosting vaccination sites in their churches, outdoors, of course. But this seems to be very helpful in terms of allowing many of the disabled or elderly to actually receive the vaccination. So I think it's just really important to meet people where they are. That's really going to be helpful for the elderly to get their needs met so that they can have this opportunity to re-engage in society. It's going to be something that we all that are in the space and those outside of the space, in other words, those that are clinicians, those that are caregivers, those that are community health workers, and all clinicians and caring individuals to see how we can get our elderly vaccinated, but how we can also encourage them that they're not alone. Can't say enough about that they're not alone in this very challenging space.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are your thoughts, Claire? I'm curious to hear what you think about how we might engage our elderly in this difficult time.
I think you're right about just more connection, more support. We are not in America or Western culture that great about kind of community with elders. You know, I feel like they get tucked away a lot, or as families, we are so spread out that we're not always nearby to our elders. And I think if there is any way for any and all of us to step up and help support them. I don't know specifically, it's not my realm of organizations that do that, but there's got to be organizations that could, you know, pair people who want to help and support elders with those things, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I agree.
Yeah. Let me see, I'm just looking through the chat. Someone's asking for some grief recovery groups, places like that. Someone put in option B. That one's a good one. There's lots of grief support online. There's Modern Loss is a really good one. Reimagine here is great. Bidwell talks a lot about grief. Cynthia, what's off the top of your head for grief?
We partner a lot with health systems in our work. And so many times there are grief support groups that are already a part of certain hospital organizations and health systems. And so I would strongly encourage you to connect with your clinicians to see what is offered through your health system partnerships. And again, the faith-based community also many times has connections with senior advocacy groups and partner in many ways that way as well. Those of us that have hospice and palliative care background, we also facilitate and help facilitate support groups within communities. So I think between your health system partners, your clinician, your faith community, senior community organizations also can connect you to grief support groups. There are opportunities to connect at that level.
Yeah, I think there's more than people realize. And I think definitely faith-based communities always have a lot of awareness of grief support in your community. So I think that's a really good piece of advice. Let's see, how do we engage individuals with mental health concerns at this time? And we're seeing unprecedented levels of depression and anxiety, and so much isolation to come with it. So I think that it is of a lot of concern these days. And I think that there's a lot of attention being paid to it, or we know that this is happening. And I think a lot of places are trying to step up and provide as much support virtually as possible. It's been a really hard year for that. I think the cumulative buildup a year into this, especially for people who are suffering with mental health issues, has been extremely difficult. What are you seeing on your end, Cynthia?
Absolutely. I totally agree with what you shared, Claire. And it's really, if I can be honest, really quite devastating when we see not only our seniors and the elderly, but what we're seeing with children, what we're seeing with teenagers and young children disconnected from their friends and their peers as it relates to missing school and the several months, almost really a year now, of course, that individuals have not been able to connect with those that bring them social support and engagement. And so we are seeing a lot of trauma and frankly, an uptick in suicide. So we're very concerned about social isolation on every level, but certainly with, as we work so heavily in the space with the folks that are dealing with advanced illness, our senior population, it really is a huge, huge challenge. So we are also then very connected with our behavioral health, public health departments, and entities within the public health department that focus on mental health support. If there ever was a time for all these community-based and government and civic entities to come together, it's now. And so we're trying to leverage all of those partnerships. And if there's any good news as it relates to this space and what this shelter in place and COVID has done, is it's forced all of us to become quite proficient on, of course, Zooms and webinars. And so we're able really to, I think, have really a multiplied opportunity to engage with these individuals. I don't know about you all, but I'm pretty much working day to night because the need is so great, and trying to connect people with various entities that can help support them with social isolation and mental health, depression, and all that accompanies that. So it's really a time that we all need to really band together.
It is a very large task at hand. So I think, talking about it as much as possible, making sure that, everyone is aware that this is a crisis, that there is support out there, asking everyone, if they're doing okay. I think letting people know that it's okay to be struggling, letting people know that there is support out there, that there's nothing to be ashamed about for getting support. I think that that's really important. I love that even Michelle Obama's talked really openly about struggling with her own anxiety and depression last year. And, just all of us need to be talking about it, because it is nothing to be ashamed about. And we all need to and deserve help, when we need it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Let's see. Annika says, everyone seems to be going through stress and or distress at this time. Domestic violence, suicide, even drug alcohol abuse has been on the rise. On the other side, families and friends have gotten closer, connected to others all over the world through Zoom, picked up on health and fitness, found support in others, even like places like through Reimagine. It's true. It's like, it's been kind of everything, right? Like the hardest and most painful, awful things. And some of the most amazing kind of growth has also happened. There really have been a lot of positives.
And as we were saying earlier, and thank you for your comment, Annika, it is true that when we talk about the good in humanity and the fact that we're all connected, I think if there ever was a time that we're seeing people really step up to the plate and acknowledge their own and all of our own issues and shortcomings, but then it also provides an openness for people to feel freer to express their own humanity. And that's so important because we're all in this together. And the best way out of it is to acknowledge what we struggle with and then also connect and see that you're not out there on your own.
Do you think people are going to feel a lot of anxiety about kind of returning to regular life, going back to schools, going back to socializing, eating indoors, restaurants, things like that? How is that going to unfold for people?
You know, I think it's kind of 50-50. In my communications with folks, it seems that a lot of people are just so thrilled to have the opportunity to get back to their favorite restaurants and eat indoors and connect with their family on these levels, and grandparents and that haven't seen their grandchildren in a year or more. And I think there's a lot of excitement, but I think on the other side, there's another 50% that's still very concerned and cautious about what can happen. And so I think it runs on both sides of the story. People are very excited on one hand and anxious to reconnect with quote unquote life as it once was. I don't know if it'll ever be the same, and nor do I think it should be. I think there's so many learnings that we were in need to glean from this moment. As I refer to it as the dual pandemic. It's the COVID-19 health disparities issues, and then it's the issues around racism that we've seen in this country. So it's such an awakening for many. Some of us, it's not so much an awakening. It's a deepening reality and very painful period. But I think that it's kind of a 50-50 thing. It depends on who you talk to at what given date, frankly.
I agree. I'm in the South and everybody is just out and about. So it's a completely different world here from all my friends in California. And I don't know if that means that it will be, easier for people to get back out to it when they can. We've just been open so much longer here. Or if it's just a different mentality in a red state. I don't know. We'll see. So,
I'll refrain my comment on that.
Yeah. I threw in that little red state. We don't have to get into it, but so what's some parting advice do you have for anyone out there going through caring for a loved one end of life, anyone out there who's grieving right now, who maybe lost someone during this last year? How do they find hope and beauty and kind of faith in moving forward?
Well, I think first and foremost, I'd like to say that you are not alone. That you are not alone. And I think if we were to tell our own personal truth, every single one of us has this deep, deep sense of some level of sadness, some level of challenge that we're all either facing or have faced. And so you are not alone. I think that's so important to be aware of. And then I think secondarily, it's important to, as much as possible, identify someone. We don't need necessarily a group first and foremost. We just need somebody that you can trust, that you feel that hears you and sees you and is willing to spend time to allow you to express yourself. And whatever form that takes, it could be crying, you may need to scream, you may need to express your emotion in any form, but you want somebody that you know will allow you to be yourself in that moment. And so identifying who is that person in my life that I can freely be who I am, that is so, so very important. And then I think what we talked about as it relates to support groups and grief support groups, be it faith-based, be it health system led, be it populations of people that are gathering in communities that you may be aware of or may have done some research around. There are small groups that can help you to literally be in the space with others that have also experienced some of what you are going through as well. So my parting knowledge and word would be, first and foremost, you're not alone. You are not alone, and you are cared for and you are loved, and it's there waiting for you. There is someone that knows you and that really wants to connect with you. And then thirdly, there's support groups that can also allow you to be your human self and express yourself, and they will understand and be there as a good listener and good listeners for you at this time.
Thank you. That is such beautiful advice. I was going to let you go, but then I remembered I have one last question I really want to ask you while you're here. And then someone had touched on it up in the chat as well. And it was about advanced care planning and thinking about how this last year, more than any other time in our existence, we need to be thinking about advanced care planning all the time when we're young and healthy. And someone up there asked about how do we help people who are afraid to talk about that or who are resistant to getting into it? What is your advice for engaging them on advanced healthcare planning?
I think that's such an important question. One of the things that COVID has done is it's helped people that in the past were not really interested in discussing advanced care planning. It's opened an opportunity to discuss it. So as an example, many of us know that when individuals have to go into a hospital setting, their caregiver or their family member aren't always allowed to go into the hospital with them. I mean, that's traumatic to think that your loved one is going to be in a hospital setting, maybe ICU or in a hospital at all, and you are not allowed to enter it with them. They are in it alone. That's traumatic. So the question then becomes, how do we think about what we want and what we don't want as it relates to care planning now? If there ever was a time for people to begin to discuss with their loved ones, their significant others, what they want or don't want as relates to their care planning, it is now. And we're seeing an uptick with people because of the COVID space. We've even developed scripts for our care navigators to really help them to engage in this conversation with people that have a lot of mistrust for health systems, but to help them to see, talk to your family. Frankly, it is and can be very empowering.
It's a gift to your loved ones to put things in place and to know it is such a gift to the people that love you,
It is. It is indeed.
Well, Cynthia, thank you so much for all of these insights and just all of your wisdom in all of these areas. You are a true gift to all of us, and the work that you're doing. I'm so appreciative, and I know everybody here is too. And thanks to Reimagine, as always, for hosting this. Cynthia, where can people find you if they're looking for you?
CynthiaCarterLive.com. I'll put it in the chat, or Dara, if you would mind, CynthiaCarterLive.com, or our accarealliance.org.
Thank you. And those will go out in the follow-up email too. All right, thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you, Claire. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Dara and Reimagine and Brad and all the team.